Who are you? This isn't a trick, just a genuine question. Are you the person you truly believe that you are, a cogito ergo sum kind of deal? Or the person that your friends think that you are? Or perhaps you're the you that the world at large tells you that you should be? It's all very complex and daunting to think about, which makes it the perfect topic to explore through the lens of horror. And in my experience, no one has covered the horror of the self better than Satoshi Kon. So I bid you to journey to the other side of sanity as we try to figure out who we really are as we immerse ourselves in Kon's masterpiece, Perfect Blue. Horror in general is one of our best tools we have as storytellers when it comes to confronting and discussing some of the most uncomfortable taboos that underlie our existence. And nothing is scarier than the idea of losing grasp of oneself. Most people don't like to get all self-existential since it is an admittedly uncomfortable topic to really dig into, but Kon just says fuck it and confronts the matter in one of the most unflinching ways possible. Full disclosure, Perfect Blue is my favorite movie of all time, and since hearing about it 4 years ago, I've watched it somewhere between 10 or 13 times, and yes, I have a problem. But in all those viewings, I've found that I can only describe Perfect Blue using 3 words: uncomfortable, terrifying, and uplifting. I feel like there's a special type of movie that exists beyond the boundaries of genre. It's not quite a thriller, which can feel like an exhilarating ride. It is instead the kind of movie that makes you feel like you're strapped down in a chair and are being forced to witness an increasingly uncomfortable and unpleasant scenario. Examples of this are things like Straw Dogs, Uncut Gems, My Most Recent Family Gathering, and Parasite, which stand in contrast to shock movies like Cannibal Holocaust or Solo, which make you uncomfortable in a more direct sense rather than through mood and tone. What makes the former so terrifying is what I like to call the in-your-face effect. Basically, in a shock horror movie, you're witnessing gross things and it's an uneasy experience, but in a film with the in-your-face effect, the tension is constantly being ramped up and it feels like the film is closing in on you and invading your personal space with each passing scene. If you're familiar with Kon's later works Paprika and Paranoia Agent, then you are painfully aware that he is a wizard at making you feel uneasy. You see, most of Satoshi Kon's movies clock in at around 70 minutes, which is fairly short for a feature film, but this plays perfectly into his plan. Thing is, when you're working with just over an hour of screen time, you need to make the most out of every second. And so when he wants you to feel unsafe or uncomfortable, he will take a perfectly paced route to ensure that. This is where we can make the distinction between rushed pacing and a slow burn. In the case of Paranoia Agent, the series uses its 30-minute episodic format to build both short-term and long-term dread. Meanwhile, in Perfect Blue, every event feels like a natural evolution to the previous one. Since it hits that 70-minute runtime, everything needs a proper foundation as to not feel like a jump in tension. A rushed pace risks breaking all sense of dread and makes the proceedings almost comical. It starts out with uncertainty from our protagonist Mima Kirigawa and then settles for a second before being aggravated by a letter bomb attack. And from there, the pace picks up and never drops once as one horrific thing compounds on another. Perfect Blue does this really cool thing of making you feel like you're losing your mind. This is especially apparent in the second third of the film where Mima is going through cycles of her daily life and then snaps awake at the drop of a hat and you, the audience member, begin to question what's real and what isn't. From that point on, the movie begins to slowly strip away any form of safety you might have thought you had going in. The sequence feels like a non-stop nightmare. It's that feeling of when you're having a bad dream and you wake up and you feel very safe and secure, and then something just absolutely blindsides you and you wake up again, and for just a second, you begin to question what's actually real and if you're still asleep. A major way Kon reinforces this uneasy feeling is by the use of very tight framing and very cramped locales. Through the language of film, Kon is trying to tell you something very simple. There is no escape. There are two distinct settings in Perfect Blue. There are very tight offices and apartments, and then there are wide open areas where Mima is smothered by other people. It's a great usage of setting to convey how trapped our protagonist feels, and it allows the audience to naturally form sympathy since you feel the same stress and paranoia that Mima is inflicted with. For me personally, the most terrifying location Kon uses to its best effect is Mima's room. Despite being a star, Mima has this incredibly cramped apartment with clothing strewn about everywhere, and at most 3 feet of walking space to go around. During the aforementioned nightmare sequence, Mima always wakes up and calms down at the sight of her own room since she knows it's a safe place. And then things begin to change. Her fish die, the angle begins to shift, clothes that are not hers end up there, and this combined with the knowledge that someone is stalking her using a blog entitled Mima's Room, it makes you slowly distrust what was once a safe haven. Throughout the film, Kon slowly chips away at any semblance of control Mima has, starting at the concert where she can't even announce her own retirement and escalating from there. First he takes away her voice, and then goes about taking away any escape. It is made incredibly clear to the audience that Mima is worried and anxious about her potential future in acting. Despite this still being show business and Mima pretty much knowing that world like the back of her hand, she is sick as a dog over her future. This nauseating anxiety is reinforced further by the color employed throughout the film. A lot of the colors look overexposed and serve to make the characters appear sickly and pale. Not only that, but it takes what should be familiar locales to Mima and makes them feel wrong. Something is alien about their tone, everything is washed out, and it feels like nothing around her is real. That is except for the color red. Blood is drawn in a very vivid and eye-popping manner. I'm sorry, it was too easy. This is how I get my kicks. This contrast almost signifies that while what Mima is experiencing may or may not be real, these deaths very much are. Speaking of reality, the major way this movie just grips me and shakes me to my core is how it blends the lines between reality and fantasy so hard that it begins to violate the very concept of truth. The way this is accomplished is half through cinematography, which I'd rather not bore you by droning on about, and the other half of the work is done in a more abstract sense through the way that identity is presented. Now, before I get into subtextual nonsense and my own interpretations of such nonsense, I want to lay down a concrete baseline as to what I mean when I say identity. By its definition, identity is, quote, the fact of being or what a person or thing is. This minor diatribe into the meaning of such a common word is important because it complements one of the major aspects of what Perfect Blue is getting at. Most, if not all of you, knew what that word meant, and through defining it, we agree on a singular interpretation, and thus we have created our own reality. General consensus is a powerful tool to be sure, and Perfect Blue takes general consensus and uses it as a weapon. In the film, most people see Mima as that idol girl who's trying her hand at acting. No one really considers her a full-fledged actor. This has a profound effect on the way Mima makes decisions and how she presents herself. She does things like pose nude and take roles involving controversial scenes, despite the fact that she hints at how uncomfortable she is with this type of work. The movie does not use things like this to demonize Mima. It portrays her as taking these garbage roles and putting her nose to the grindstone and proving herself, all the while criticizing the fame machine that doesn't care for her as a person. This is an important aspect as what makes Mima such a sympathetic character. The audience is always aware of how hard she's working for what she wants, and the film never tries to look down on her. The project Mima is acting in even plays a part in how she perceives herself. Not only in her role, but the plot of the serial she stars in intentionally mirrors the events that are actually happening to her. Even more, the show is called Double Blind, a reference to double-blind experiments where both the participant and observer are left in the dark about any info going into the test, which is the perfect way to describe how the audience feels observing Mima's journey. From beginning to end, we get to see how the perception of Mima motivates the cast and pushes the plot forward. The movie opens up on what is ostensibly a thesis to outline every one of our main players' thoughts on what Mima should be, and the line that sticks out in particular is, this sentence hits in such a strange way since by the end you're asking the very same question, since it's apparent that almost the entire cast doesn't care about Mima's thoughts or even Mima herself. Well, they do, just not the Mima you and I know. A toxic trait you'll find amongst some people is the inability to simply accept someone for who they are and instead have to go out of their way to enforce their idea of what they should be onto them. Not only is this insanely obnoxious, but it's also emotionally damaging and makes the victim question everything about themselves. We see two distinct parts of this play out through the film's antagonists. We see one through an intensely intimate lens that wants to live vicariously through Mima, and the other which is the perception of a stranger who believes he knows more about Mima than she does. Straight up, Mr. Mimanya is one of the most terrifying things in a horror movie. He is comically hideous and almost makes you believe he's actually a red herring of sorts, and by the end of the film you'd wish he was. Especially now in our digital age, the evolution of fandom has brought about a lot of good and an equal amount of bad. It's been said before that the way Khan portrays the relationship between creator and fan was years ahead of its time, but it really is wild how on the money that man was. The dynamic between Mima and Mimanya, who I'll just refer to as Uchida to cut down on the M names, is that of fame conflicting with anonymity. Uchida knows everything there is to know about Mima the star, and Mima has no clue that this guy even exists. Notice an important distinction I just made there? Mima the star. He only knows a facet of Mima's identity, and yet built his whole perception around a small piece of the picture. Judgments and assumptions based on such limited information is incredibly dangerous, since when Mima starts doing a little thing called thinking for herself, she reaches an impasse where she sees what's best for her, but this unhinged fan sees nothing but a betrayal, since this is nothing like what the Mima I know would do. This is observed in the film through Mima seeing visions of herself in her idol getup. She's directly confronting something that she isn't anymore, and yet something she's told that she should be. I miss the old Mima, she was better as an idol. Things like that do a number on someone trying something new. But fame especially causes that link to personhood to be lessened. Yes, we have the right to criticize and have our own opinions of those in the public eye, but to begin to demand something from someone is a step too far. This isn't helped by the worst relationship in Mima's life, her partnership with Rumi. We all have that one family member, right? The one that ever so slightly wants you to be a certain way, since honestly it's just the best for you, sweetie, and they care about you so much, but not enough to actually accept you for who you are, but just enough to let you know that you're wrong. This is a more intimate version of Mima's relationship with Uchida, since Rumi is somewhat of a mother figure in Mima's life, and she takes full advantage of that in any way she can. She goes on about what an idol should be and how back in her days as an idol she'd never do the things Mima was doing. The movie makes it clear that Rumi is past her best days, and you slowly get the feeling that she's just using Mima as a surrogate to forge another career for herself. And by the end of the film, we see all of Mima's fears realized, as Rumi is determined that the girl in front of her cannot possibly be Mima, so that leaves the persona of Mima Rin open for the taking, and she swoops in as fast as she can to fill that gap. Between the two, Uchida lusts after the Mima who could never be, and Rumi acts as the Mima that is no more. But let me ask you that question again. What about Mima's feelings? The way we view ourselves is one of the most important things to keep in mind. I spoke briefly in my Beastars video about how losing the image of yourself is not inherently a bad thing, and while I stand by that, allow me to differentiate. The idea of losing negative aspects of yourself and taking on the traits of those you become close to can be seen as a positive and consensual act, while Perfect Blue sets up an existential nightmare of having you forcefully taken away from yourself. When something like that happens, it's hard to even accept that you are real. You feel as though you're a stranger in your own mind. Oh, that's not like you. Well, what is like me? I chose this, right? Obviously it's like me. But as much as we tell ourselves who we are, it's easy for others to agree on their own reality in correlation to our identity. I mean, we did earlier, didn't we? I mean, after all, perception is reality, and reality is king. That seems pretty bleak, doesn't it? But like I said, it's easy to change reality. We aren't people surrounded on all ends by those who want the worst for us. We have our friends and loved ones who are there to support us, the us that we truly are. But above all external forces, your best friend is yourself. Keep that in mind for just a minute as I set up this fucking sick conclusion, okay? The last 10 minutes of Perfect Blue is probably my favorite sequence in any movie. It begins with Mima waking up in her room after a spat with Uchida, and she begins to notice some things are different. Her fish are alive, her Cham poster is hung up, and most of all, she's not in her apartment building. She is in fact not in her room, but Rumi's, and this is the last place she wants to be. Rumi then appears in Mima's idol outfit and begins to give chase as Mima makes a last-ditch effort to run for her life. This is taking the metaphorical fear of losing a part of yourself that Mima had struggled with up until that point and has fully literalized it. Now it is not the mental combat between Mima and Mima Rin, since the latter has come to the conclusion that the former should not and cannot exist. This is one of the most intense and terrifying sequences in a horror film, full stop, and goes to show that Satoshi Kon is a master at ending a movie. Between this, Millennium Actress Paprika, and Tokyo Godfathers, the man did not miss. The way it's edited, paced, and scored, you feel on the edge of your seat until the very last frame of the chase, and then the ending happens. I've read plenty of times that some people actually don't like the ending of Perfect Blue since they claim it's a tone breaker and too much of a happily ever after type thing, and I'm here to call them stupid and smelly. Oh! This ending is, for lack of a better term, perfect, and let me tell you why. I've spent the last 15 minutes or so telling you how this movie portrays relationships others have to us, and more importantly, how we relate to ourselves. This ending shows the full realization of Mima as herself, while it portrays Rumi as someone lost between two personas which can never coexist. Mima has gone through hell to reach this point, and when she finally gets in her car, she takes one good look at herself and says, something about that is just so uplifting. While it scares the shit out of me, Perfect Blue isn't a horror movie. It's a coming-of-age story. And it's the best one I've ever seen. Mima has a lot to be afraid of, don't get me wrong, but above all else, she is terrified of an uncertain future that comes with following her dreams. It's a universal fear. What will people think of me is the scariest question we can ever ask ourselves. Perfect Blue answers that question by reassuring us that it doesn't matter too much, since at the end of the day, we're the ones living our lives. It's impossible to live through someone else, and we should live to our fullest in spite of what others may think. That kind of neuroticism will only lead to our downfall. Rumi and Uchida show the dangers on both ends of relationships like that. It's mutually assured destruction of the self. Perfect Blue, like most things I adore, began by making me feel uncomfortable and scared. But the more I fell into it, the more I began to see myself in it. From time to time, I get in that headspace of being afraid of myself and wondering if I'm incorrect as a person. I wonder if what people are telling me is the way I should be. I wonder if the me that exists now is better off just not. Sometimes I do take what other people say to heart, even if I know it's in bad faith, because it's hard not to. As much as I tell myself it doesn't matter, it matters to me. But then I remember that it's because I'm human. We all are. And at one point, everyone has felt the infinite horror that comes with simply being you. The what ifs of our life will kill us, but conversely, the what ares can save us. I can live in fear and change myself to conform to what other people want, but every morning I'm the one who has to look in that mirror. So if that's the case, I want to look in the eyes of someone that I love being. Since despite everything, the man in the mirror is still me. And if I'm being honest, I wouldn't want it any other way. My name is Michael. Let's talk again soon.